was cool.
Okay. Hi and welcome back. My name is Clayton Chapman, and today we are going to make homemade apple pie, just like Grandma used to make, if your grandma made pie. First things first, we're going to start with the crust, and it is so incredibly easy. It is only 3 ingredients: flour, butter, and water. And we do what's called a 3-2-1 ratio. If that's all you remember from all of this, take that away. 3 parts flour, 2 parts butter, 1 part ice, like ice cold ice water. For a 8-inch cast iron, which is what we're going to bake our apple pie in today, we're going to take 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 cups of whole butter. Now the butter is pretty cold, and you want to keep it as cold as you can, simply because we're going to mix this dough in with our fingers. You know, as our fingers heat up the dough, it's going to melt the butter a little bit. But the key to making this so great are going to be these like big pockets of the whole butter, because as the butter melts, it's going to create steam as the crust is in the oven, and it's going to make it just like really light and flaky and delicious. Just gotta, I don't know, beat it like you're mad at it. And then I just have ice water. I'm gonna go ahead and measure a cup of. We're just gonna let this sit here for a second. So basically what I'm doing, we're gonna cut in the flour, take the butter, break it up with your fingers a little bit. And you wanna leave like good, you know, dime or nickel sized pieces. You can make any kind of pie with this particular crust. It's really versatile, so there's no sugar in it, so all the added sugar is going to come from the apples and the sugar that we put in. So you can actually use this crust for like quiche. If you were baking eggs or something like that, it can be savory as well. So nice big pieces of butter, and then you almost just kind of like want to toss your flour around it so that it's nice and coated, and then you're just going to kind of pinch it with your fingers. And that flour is going to mix in with your butter. You're going to be left with, like, you know, between nickel and dime or pea-sized pieces of flour. You're just going to kind of mix it in there. So the trick is to not overwork it. You can always make your butter pieces smaller by continuing to work it with your hands, but you can't go backwards. All right. Now that we're looking at our butter and pea-sized pieces, we're going to go ahead and add our water. So this is the key to not really over mixing. We might need a splash more. I'm just going to kind of toss it in with my hands, fold it over itself until it starts to come together. I just want to add a splash more water. Well, I left my butter pieces pretty big, and sometimes the bigger the pieces of the butter, the more the water you have to add. But the trick is getting this all mixed together without overworking the flour and developing too much gluten in the dough. And so the idea is to just mix it until it wants to bind together. Sometimes I'll just take my hands and dip them in my water, just so I can kind of push all this together. Looking good. A little sticky, it's okay. I think it's important to wrap it in plastic while it sits at room temperature so that it doesn't develop a skin on the outside. I have never met an apple pie that I did not like. With that said, I think that the best apples to use are something that's really crisp in nature. So these are Gala apples, which I think are great. Red skin, really firm flesh. Granny Smith apples are also great for apple pie. I'm gonna go ahead and peel my apples. See, these are great, they're nice and juicy. Every year for my kid's birthday, I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I've always made their birthday dessert, whatever it is. And I always give them the choice. Do you want cake or do you want pie? If it was up to me, we would always have pie, but kids don't always work that way. So I always like asking people that question, are you a cake person or a pie person? Because I think you can tell a lot about somebody by what they say. Well, then you get my daughter who says both, Dad, both. Both, Dad, I want both. You're addicted to sugar. So what I like to do is quarter, and then just go through, remove any core and seeds. Johnny Appleseed, his last name was Chapman. Did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah. 10th removed ancestor, something, uncles, brothers, cousins, ex-roommate. Sometimes I like to do some of the long like this, but then what I'll do is I'll do some this way as well. And I'm still cutting them all the same thickness, but what that's gonna do is the bigger ones are gonna wrap with the smaller ones, and it's just gonna help create a tighter seal on the pie. All right, so next step, we've got our apples cut. And this is one of those things that I've always just done by eye, feel, taste. Everybody's sugar palate, I guess you could say, is different. So some people love a lot of sugar, some people don't. So this is where you really get to decide if you want your apple pie to be incredibly sweet or not. So I add my sugar first, because what it's gonna do is it's going to bind to the apple, and it's going to help the apples purge some of their juice. So what's gonna end up happening is it's gonna start to create this little syrup in the bottom of the bowl. And eventually we're gonna add a little flour, and it's gonna make like its own little sauce. So here's something that I like to do that is a little different than what folks are probably normally used to. So we're all about like keeping it local here in Nebraska. So instead of adding like a citrus, you know, like a lemon juice to our apples, we're gonna add apple cider vinegar, which is made here in Nebraska. And instead of using like a vanilla extract, I've made like a cedar extract. So this is cedar, like cedar wood, that I've charred on open flame. And once it was on fire, I put it in a really high proof grain alcohol. Now this is Everclear. And close the container, allow all the smoke to sit in the container with the grain alcohol, and then you just allow the cedar to continue to sit in it. And it picks up a lot of the same principles that like a vanilla extract would, but it's got a little bit more depth, a little bit more oomph. We're just gonna give a little splash of this where you would vanilla, a little bit of apple cider vinegar. It's made from our friends George Paul Vinegar out in Cody, Nebraska. And then I like to add winter spice, so a little bit of nutmeg, fresh grated, using a microplane just to put it in there. And again, this is kind of all by sight and smell and taste. Some people like a lot of spice in theirs, some don't. I like more cinnamon than I like nutmeg in my apple pie. But I think using the fresh grated spices over the pre-ground, I think you're gonna see an amazing difference just in the depth of flavor and the brightness and the freshness. We're gonna do some fresh grated cinnamon. I just want to add a little flour. It's just kind of a light dusting or whatever, just to take any of that liquid that's running off the apples, and it's going to help thicken it so it creates almost like a saucy syrup. All right, we're just going to give a nice light dusting here. Now this we're going to cut in half. Half is going to be for the bottom. The other half is going to be for our top, for our lattice work. I'm going to grease the pan. So, nice healthy dose of butter here. And then I just like to take some flour, sprinkle it in. All right, there we go. Nice and coated. We're just going to kind of work this stages, flipping it over as we go. I'm really not putting any pressure, well, a little bit of pressure, but I'm using just kind of the palms of my hands. You might need to add a touch of flour as you go. Continue to flip so that it doesn't stick on you. So we're gonna roll out to about between 1/8 and 1/4 inch, closer to 1/4 inch really. And then I like to take my pan, flip it over, measure. Now, you want to give yourself a good inch or so on the outside of your cast iron, because as you drop your dough in, it's going to slump. Lay our pan down, take your knife, cut your ring. gonna kind of lay this in here, and I'm just gonna stretch it a little bit to bring it all the way up my sides. Make sure that it's filling all the corners. And I like to dock the dough, just meaning taking a fork, creating some air holes. And this will just keep the dough from rising on you so it stays in place. Give our apples one more stir. Make sure everything's nice and incorporated. You can see this kind of sauce that's in the bottom here. I just want that just a touch thicker. And they go. Push all these apples down. Set this aside and we'll do the lattice work. So we're gonna take the other half of our dough. Get a little bit of flour going. Start to roll it out. So you wanna just make sure that this is the length of the whole pie with a little wiggle room. Just kind of square off my edges here. We're gonna go ahead and dock these edges here so that we have a little something for our weave to stick to. And the layering begins. And then you alternate, you go above, below, above, below, above. Look at that baby. Go. So we've got all our overhang. I'm gonna go ahead and just go through, kind of put a little pressure everywhere, kind of make sure that it's secure. Cast iron apple pie. I bet John Wayne made cast iron apple pie. Little egg wash. This is what's gonna make it nice and shiny. There she goes. 400-degree oven with a fan. It's gonna cook until it's done. Probably about an hour or so. What do you think? Should we eat it? Oh, you hear that? Sounds good. It's delicious. It's not very sweet. This is where I would love to add like vanilla ice cream or something like that to it. But it just really highlights the flavor of the apple. You got that nice apple cider vinegar, a little winter spice, the cinnamon and the nutmeg. And the crust is awesome and flaky and buttery all the way through, on the sides, on the top, on the bottom. I'm happy. So happy I'm gonna eat another bite. Cast iron's just cooler. Show up to a party with a pie and cast iron. It's cooler, I promise. What do you mean this isn't interesting, watching me cut apples for 20 minutes?